high school sounds so boring. I want Pinterest projects and mummifying chickens for history and baking for math. I get it. Going into high school, I thought it was going to be really boring too, but I have found these years to be fantastic. So today, we're going to talk about a few ways that you can add fun into your high school student's day. Welcome back, I'm Tricia, and this is another in my series that I've kind of mentally called I Want to Homeschool High School, but... And so each of these videos that I've been doing, on Mondays I'm putting out a series and kind of addressing the common concerns, questions, objections that people have to homeschooling high school. You probably know, if you've been around, that I am not a Pinteresty type of mom. That's not how we add fun into our days generally. We do have a lot of fun, but not like that. And yet, as we approach high school, I was like, I don't want to spend our days doing textbooks and listing, memorizing dates and names. Like, that just sounded horrible to me. And I like fun. So I wanted to keep that in mind as we planned. So, number one idea is to include things like fiction movies, musicals, fiction books that go along with your time periods. I think, we get in this idea that like everything has to have a direct educational tie-in. And sometimes those educational tie-ins can be just things like learning about the culture of the time. And we can do that in ways like musicals. For my daughter, she did U.S. history this year. And so I found musicals from that go along with different time periods to give her just a sense of like what people found entertaining at the time. So we did like State Fair, we did Music Man, we did, I can't even think what else we did. Those are the ones that stood out to me. So we took those and there was no she wasn't learning any dates. She wasn't learning any, there was no objectives that I could mark off, but it gave her a sense of the time and the place within our history. Fiction books. You could do just straight up fiction, like books that were written, a book that was written in the 1980s, a book that was written in the 1980s, whatever, you could do that. We did a lot of historical fiction that I wasn't so much looking for her to learn history from any of them, but to help her make ties with what she was learning. And so we did 8 historical fiction books this year. A lot of them she did as audiobooks, and she just read them within each unit of our history. And that was a great add-in, something fun. There was no grading, nothing like that. It was just completed. And she enjoyed it. I enjoyed hearing about the books she read. Movies, again, you could do ones that are kind of historically fiction, or you can just do, think of the great 80s movies. Pick one and have your student do it in the when they get to that time period in history, or whatever, Gettysburg for Civil War. And you can, so besides just learning about the culture and kind of the time and giving children a way to your teen a way to visualize that time period, I think it also just helps to kind of break up the more monotonous parts of high school and to remind them that there's still fun to be had. And I think that was kind of the overarching objective. Idea number 2, podcasts are the new documentary. There are so many fantastic podcasts out there that you can add in. There are ones, you'll hear the big ones like What I Missed in History Class, something like that. There are some great science ones like Shortwave and Science Versus. If you're not a podcast listener already, you can start with some of those big ones like What I Missed in History Class. And then just kind of broaden your search from there. Number 3, discussion time. This has absolutely been one of my very favorite parts of high school because she's at that age where she has so many thoughts, like critically thought out thoughts of her own, and how what she's learning relates to the bigger world and what she thinks about all of those things. And we have had some fantastic discussions. Some people will set aside like a chunk of time every week to have discussions, or a chunk of time each day. A lot of ours was just more naturally, organically in our days. Almost every day when she was working on her history, she would stop and tell me something that she found interesting or I would like. So there's a lot of that, just as we were making lunch and driving and that kind of thing. But a couple questions that you can ask that I would use at the beginning of high school to start developing this as a habit. Tell me something that you learned. Tell me something that you learned that I would find interesting. And I really like that one because you can tell, like, well, it's interesting to learn what they think about what you'll like. And why was such and such important? So why was it important when they discovered germ theory? Why was it important when books became why was it important when people became, like, our nation became more literate, as a majority literate, that kind of thing. And yeah, like, it's really interesting to what connections they make on their own. Another way to have fun is to not stick with just textbooks. When you come into high school, a lot of people think that, like, you need to get serious and work on textbooks. I've talked about this in a different one. I don't remember what the title of it was, but I'll leave it down there and up there. But you don't have to just do textbooks. So our history this year that she absolutely loved was called U.S. History Detective by Critical Thinking Company. And I did a video just about this one. It starts with the assumption that your student has already learned kind of the basics of history. And it starts filling in details about it. So one example was in the early 1900s, as transportation became easier and cheaper with railroads, steamboats, etc. One of the side effects was that there was a flourish in American writers, people like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Thoreau, those kind of people, because their writing, it was easier to distribute their books. And so it took this idea of transportation, and you learn about that and the railroad expansions and all of that, but gave a real world example of why that and those authors, kind of that collision of those two things, helped, both of them, and changed the way, influenced the way our society was thinking about things because of what the new writings that we were learning. Does that make sense? Anyway, so that was a great book because it provided a lot of discussions and a lot of really just interesting things, connections that I had never made, and of course she had never made either. So yes, you're going to need textbooks probably in high school. Most homeschoolers do it in some way at some point, but you don't have to. And so don't like limit yourself in that way. Lastly, let's go back to that mummifying chickens thing. If you are a Story of the World user, you know what I talk about this, or you know what I'm talking about. So in Story of the World 1, Ancient History, one of the projects is to mummify a chicken, a whole chicken, to go along with ancient Egypt. So you could take a project like that and learn the science behind it. You could expand on it and talk about the different ways that mummifying something, I don't even know what the word is, go into more detail about the process and how it would really work and who would do it and what cultures would do something like that and what wouldn't. There's a lot of ways that you could take some of those Pinterest fun projects and expand it to work for high school. You don't have to just stick with kind of the idea of those boring projects that we did as high schoolers, the posters and the tri-boards and those kind of things. That's not necessary. So don't forget about having fun in high school. When your students drift off from here and start into the real world, these are going to be some of their freshest memories. So make them good ones. Make them fun ones. Make them enjoyable ones. I will see you